Get ready for a tactical slugfest between two of the world's best, Jan-Krzysztof Duda and Arjun Erigaisi. This rapid showdown promises fireworks from the very first moves. Duda opens with a classic Catalan setup, fianchettoing his light-squared bishop. Erigaisi challenges the center and accepts the gambit, snatching the pawn on c4 and setting up a complex middle game. Both sides develop logically. Duda completes his kingside setup, while Arjun prepares for queenside expansion, putting his rook on b8 and getting ready to push his b-pawn forward. Duda immediately challenges black's queenside pawn structure with b3. After the pawns are traded, the A-file is opened up. Both players complete their development, eyeing the central and queenside files. White brings the knight to d2, preparing to redeploy, but black is quick to jump a knight into the beautiful outpost on b4. Duda unleashes a thunderbolt, knight to e5, a brilliant sacrifice that rips open the position, disrupts black's harmony, and sets the stage for a venomous attack on the queenside. Arjun has little choice but to capture the bishop on g2, and Duda recaptures with the king to g2. A fantastic and only move that keeps the pressure on. The point is, this sequence, queen to d5 with check. After knight to f3 defends, black plays rook to c8, but now bishop to a3 simply wins a piece. Arjun defends carefully, moving his rook to b6, but Duda continues his plan, bringing the bishop to a3 to pile on the pressure. And there it is again. Duda plays knight to f3, offering yet another piece. A second brilliant sacrifice, challenging black's control of the critical e5 square and keeping the initiative alive. Black is more or less forced to take the knight on e5, and white recaptures, planting a monster knight back on e5. But Arjun Erigaisi finds a brilliant response of his own. The pawn marches to f6. This is a fantastic counter-sacrifice, challenging that central knight and neutralizing white's most immediate threats. What a fight! This forces an exchange of pieces on b4, with both sides trading off their bishops. The game remains incredibly tense. Duda's knight on c6 is a major annoyance, and he now begins to probe on the king side, pushing his h-pawn up the board to create new weaknesses. After some careful maneuvering, black strikes in the center with the pawn push to e5. Pawns are traded, the position opens up dramatically, and white's queen lands on e4, keeping the game balanced on a knife's edge. And right here, in this complex position, Arjun makes a subtle slip. He plays his rook, but there was a much stronger defense. The better move was queen to f7. After knight to b7, and queen takes the pawn on b3, knight takes bishop on d6, and pawn recaptures, black would have been winning a pawn. But in the game, he plays the rook to f7, and this gives white a clear, lasting edge for the first time. Duda immediately capitalizes, pushing his h-pawn to h5 to crank up the kingside attack. After trading it for the g-pawn, the files around the black king are dangerously open. And now the classic attacking maneuver. The rook lifts to h1 and swings over to h4, putting immense pressure on black's king. Black's defense is cracking under the pressure. This rook move is another inaccuracy that allows white to launch a decisive attack. A better try was pushing the pawn to a5. After rook to g4, rook takes rook, queen recaptures with check, and the king steps to h8. Black would still be in the game. Instead, after the move played, the rook moves back to f6, and white's advantage grows to a winning one. But wait, Duda misses the killer blow. King to g1 is played, but rook to g4 check would have won a pawn on the spot and simplified into a completely winning endgame. A small let-off for black. Black's queen shuffles back to e8, and Duda continues his assault with a new plan, pushing the pawn to f4. And that is another step in the wrong direction. Rook to e6 allows white's attack to become overwhelming, as the e5 pawn is now hanging, and white is threatening to win a piece. White's pieces are now working in perfect harmony. The knight reroutes beautifully through d4 and lands on the monster e6 square, right on the king's doorstep. Black's position is collapsing. Duda goes for a check, but it's not the most precise. He misses a faster path to victory. The crushing move was pawn to g4. After queen to h7, pawn to g5, a rook sacrifice on e6, and then pawn to g6, the attack would have been unstoppable. But in the game, he plays queen to a8 with check, letting black hang on just a bit longer. Black's queen hurries back to g8 to defend, and white's queen returns to e4, preparing for the final push. And this is the final, fatal mistake. In a desperate attempt to create counterplay, Erigaisi makes a move that looks threatening but loses on the spot. The only chance was queen to h7. After rook to h2, rook to b8, queen to c6, and queen takes the pawn on f5, black could have kept defending, winning a pawn. But instead he plays queen takes pawn on g3 with check. a disastrous blunder that backfires completely, and Duda finds the perfect reply. Rook to g2 is the only move, but it's a brilliant one. It refutes black's attack completely and secures the win. The queen is trapped. Black tries one last check with the queen to e1, but this is just a final gasp in a totally lost position. Incredibly, a mistake from Duda, king to h2 is played, but this actually allows a nearly impossible computer-like saving resource for black, starting with pushing the pawn to c5, a last tiny window of hope. But the saving idea is incredibly difficult to find. Erigaisi misses his one fleeting chance to get back in the game. He had to play the pawn to c5. After queen to g4, pawn to e4 check, knight to f4, and bishop takes knight, black would have been winning a piece. But he missed it, and in the game, the rook goes to b8, slamming the door shut. The position is completely winning for white again, and Duda finds the clincher, queen to g4. A fantastic move that ends all resistance. The threat is now unstoppable. Rook takes rook on g6, pawn recaptures, the king moves to g8, and rook takes the pawn on h6, winning a full rook. Black throws in one last check with the pawn to i4. But Duda is ruthless. Knight to f4 is the final brilliant nail in the coffin. This is the only move, and it forces a win of massive material, a perfect end to the attack. And on that move, Arjun Erigaisi resigns. A brilliant, complex battle ultimately decided by a late blunder. White wins, and here's the crushing line that black saw. Queen takes the rook on h4 with check. White's queen simply recaptures. After bishop to e5, king to h1, and bishop to c3, white is just up a decisive amount of material.